February 26, 1991. Captain John Bledsoe is flying his A-6 Intruder over Kuwait at dawn. What he sees below him stops him cold. A traffic jam. Miles and miles of vehicles bumper to bumper trying to flee north on Highway 80 toward Basra. Tanks, armored vehicles, trucks, buses, stolen Kuwaiti cars, thousands of vehicles packed together. Some are military, some are civilian. All of them are trying to escape Kuwait before the American and coalition ground forces catch them. Bledsoe gets on the radio. "We've got the entire Iraqi army trying to bug out. They're sitting ducks." Welcome back to Gulf War Chronicles. Today we're talking about one of the most controversial and devastating attacks of Desert Storm, the Highway of Death. In less than 24 hours, coalition aircraft turned a 6-lane highway into the most infamous stretch of road in modern warfare. The images shocked the world, and some people say they're the reason President Bush ended the war when he did. Let's talk about what really happened on Highway 80. First, let's set the scene. By February 26th, the ground war had been going for just over 48 hours. The Iraqi army in Kuwait was collapsing. Saddam Hussein had ordered a withdrawal. He was calling it a strategic repositioning, but everyone knew it was a retreat. Iraqi units were abandoning their positions and heading north toward the Iraqi border as fast as they could. Problem was, there were only a few major roads out of Kuwait. Highway 80, the main route from Kuwait City to Basra, became a bottleneck. Now here's what made this different from a normal military retreat. The Iraqis weren't just taking military equipment. During their occupation of Kuwait, they'd looted everything that wasn't nailed down. Kuwaiti cars, trucks, buses, fire engines, ambulances, you name it, they stole it. And they were trying to take it all back to Iraq. So mixed in with the military convoy were hundreds, maybe thousands, of stolen civilian vehicles loaded with loot. Television sets, furniture, jewelry, anything of value. Coalition intelligence spotted this massive convoy forming. General Schwarzkopf and his commanders had a decision to make. These were enemy forces retreating, which made them legitimate military targets, but they were also fleeing, not fighting. Do you let them go and risk them reorganizing to fight another day? Or do you destroy them while you have the chance? The decision was made: hit them hard. The attack started in the early morning hours of February 26th. Navy A-6s from the aircraft carrier USS Ranger went in first. Their tactic was simple but devastating. Hit the front of the convoy to block the road. Hit the back of the convoy to trap everyone. Then work your way through the middle. Captain Steve Weatherspoon was one of the first pilots on scene. He dropped cluster bombs on vehicles at the front of the column. Massive explosions. Vehicles burst into flames. The highway was now blocked. Nobody could go forward. Within minutes, more aircraft arrived. Marine A-6 Intruders, Air Force F-16 Fighting Falcons, A-10 Warthogs, even some F/A-18 Hornets. They came in waves, attacking the trapped convoy. Some pilots used laser-guided bombs. Some used cluster munitions. The A-10 strafed with their 30mm cannons. It was a turkey shoot. The vehicles had nowhere to go, packed together on a 6-lane highway with desert on either side. Lieutenant Colonel Dick White was flying an A-10 that morning. He described it as surreal. There were vehicles as far as you could see. Some were trying to drive off-road to escape. Some had abandoned their vehicles and were running. We just worked our way down the column, hitting anything that looked military. His wingman, Major Bob Swain, said the whole highway was on fire within an hour. Black smoke rising thousands of feet into the air, visible for miles. The Iraqis tried to fight back, but they were helpless. Some vehicles had anti-aircraft guns and they fired at the attacking aircraft, tracers going everywhere. But they were shooting blind, panicked. The coalition aircraft were attacking from multiple directions. Too many targets, too much chaos. A few aircraft took ground fire damage, but none were shot down. The Iraqis were completely overwhelmed. By mid-morning, the highway was a nightmare scene. Destroyed and burning vehicles stretched for miles. Some eyewitness accounts said up to 2,000 vehicles were hit. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, military trucks, all legitimate targets. but also buses, civilian cars, fire trucks. The images that would later be shown around the world were apocalyptic. Charred vehicles, twisted metal, destruction everywhere. Now here's where it gets controversial. How many people died on Highway 80? Nobody knows for sure. Initial estimates were in the thousands. Some reports said 10,000 casualties. But here's the thing. When ground forces arrived to assess the damage, they found way fewer bodies than expected. Most of the Iraqi soldiers had apparently abandoned their vehicles and fled into the desert on foot before or during the attack. They left everything behind and ran. The actual death toll was probably in the hundreds, not thousands. Still tragic, still a lot of people, but nowhere near what the initial reports suggested. The vehicles were destroyed, but many of them were empty or nearly empty when they were hit. Iraqi soldiers interviewed after the war confirmed this. When the aircraft started attacking, most people just jumped out and ran. Some died in the vehicles or trying to escape, but most survived. But the images didn't show empty vehicles. The media arrived shortly after the attack and photographed the devastation, and those images went around the world. Destroyed tanks with their turrets blown off, burned out cars, the charred remains of those who didn't escape. It looked like a massacre, and that's how it was portrayed in much of the international press. Critics called it a war crime. They said you can't attack a retreating army like that. But international law is clear. Retreating forces are still combatants and are legitimate targets unless they surrender. The Iraqis on Highway 80 weren't surrendering. They were retreating with their weapons and equipment, which meant they could regroup and fight again. From a legal standpoint, the attack was justified. But legal and right aren't always the same thing in the court of public opinion. There's something about the images of Highway 80 that bothered people. Even some of the pilots who flew those missions had mixed feelings afterward. They'd done their job, they'd followed orders, but the scale of destruction was sobering. Lieutenant Colonel Dick White later said, "We'd won. The war was basically over. Seeing all that carnage, you had to wonder if it was necessary." President George H.W. Bush was reportedly disturbed by the images. There are accounts that he saw the footage on CNN and said words to the effect of, "We're starting to look like we're killing for the sake of killing." Whether that directly influenced his decision to call a ceasefire is debated, but the timing is interesting. The attack on Highway 80 happened on February 26th. Bush announced the ceasefire on February 27th. The war ended at 8 a.m. on February 28th. Some military commanders were frustrated by the ceasefire. They wanted to continue the attack, to completely destroy the Republican Guard, to push all the way to Baghdad. General Barry, McCaffrey's 24th Infantry Division, was still in heavy combat when the ceasefire was called, but Bush and his advisors had seen enough. The Highway of Death images probably played a role in that decision, even if it wasn't the only factor. There's actually a second Highway of Death that fewer people know about. Highway 8, another route from Kuwait to Iraq, also got hit hard. Some reports say the destruction there was even worse than Highway 80. But Highway 8 didn't get the media attention, so it's not part of the public memory the same way. The Iraqi perspective on this is interesting. Some Iraqi veterans are angry about it, calling it a slaughter. Others say it was legitimate combat and they don't blame the coalition for taking advantage of the situation. One Iraqi officer told an interviewer years later, "We were stealing, we were running, and we got caught. What did we expect would happen?" The looted Kuwaiti property became a symbol of the Iraqi occupation's brutality. When Kuwaiti citizens returned to their country, they found entire neighborhoods stripped bare. Schools, hospitals, government buildings, all looted. And some of that stolen property was destroyed on Highway 80, burned up in vehicles that never made it back to Iraq. There's a certain poetic justice in that, even if the method was brutal. Here's what I think is important to understand about Highway 80. War is ugly. This wasn't a clean video game. Real people died in those vehicles, even if it was fewer than initially reported. But those were also people who'd participated in an illegal invasion, who'd been part of an occupation that committed atrocities against Kuwaiti civilians, who were literally fleeing with stolen property. The moral calculus isn't simple. The Highway of Death also marked a turning point in how modern warfare is covered. This was the first war where satellite television meant people around the world could see battlefield footage within hours. CNN was showing destroyed vehicles on Highway 80 while the ground war was still ongoing. That kind of real-time coverage changed public perception and probably influenced political decisions in ways that hadn't happened in previous wars. For the pilots who flew those missions, it was just another day in the war. They had targets, they engaged them, mission accomplished. But the images ensured that February 26, 1991 would be remembered as one of the most visually striking and controversial days of Desert Storm. The Highway of Death became iconic, a symbol of coalition military power, of Iraqi defeat, and of the sometimes brutal reality of warfare. If you remember seeing those Highway of Death images on the news in '91, or if you flew missions against that convoy, leave a comment below. This is one of those Desert Storm moments that everyone remembers, but the full story is more complicated than the pictures suggested. Thanks for watching Gulf War Chronicles. Hit that subscribe button if you want more real Gulf War history. I'll see you in the next one.